She brought him to Jordan, and they're talking there and discussing about his future life and his past life and so forth. And Jitsi comes and surprises them at the ship. They weren't expecting to see Jitsi at that point, but there he was. So Jitsi comes along with them, and I should give you a little background. Now, we went over this on another tape, so I'll run through it kind of quickly. Jitsi was a very religious type of person and had a lot of trouble understanding that this lady Asket could be from another world and was not an angel sent by God. So after they got over that hump, it was decided that it might be a good idea for Jitsi to come along, and he was extended the opportunity to come with them if he chose to do so. And there were some discussions, of course. Jitsi told them that he was God-fearing and believed in the Bible and all of this, and they had to have a few conversations with Jitsi before they left to explain that one, Asket was not an angel. She did not come behalf on any God, and she was not here to change the world or anything, and that Edward was undergoing, you might say, history lessons, and that the purpose of this mission was to educate him, and that Edward had already put out much effort over his short lifetime so far to educate himself very well in matters of spirit and so forth, so he would be ready for this particular journey that he was getting ready to take. Well, as I mentioned on the other tape, Jitsi goes with him. They do make a few other time jumps through history and kind of get up to speed, so to speak, so they'd be ready for this one. It's no secret that probably nothing has had more impact on our society on this planet the last 2,000 years than Christianity, i.e. the story of Jesus Christ. And no matter where you go on the planet, you can get yourself into a darn good discussion with anyone when you bring up the subject of religion. Because depending on where you were born and how you were raised, people from all different parts of the world all have a little different viewpoint. The majority of the world does not believe in Christianity. Just simple numbers. Most of the people are either Islamic or Buddhist. Not that many of them are Christian. Now, we live here in America where predominantly this is a Christian society. When you're born into this world, that's what you are told is true. There's no reason for us not to believe it. That's just what our parents and everyone tells us, but there really is no proofs provided, and we are not an open-minded society, at least we haven't been too much in the past, that allows you the freedom to actually learn about all the other religions. One of the problems is our education system. This country was founded on the principle of religious freedom. We do have freedom of speech, and fortunately in this country you can go seek out this knowledge. But you don't have too many options when you're a little kid. You're just taken by the hand and taken to whatever church or synagogue or center that your parents belong to. And for most of us grow up, at least for most of our younger years, we grow up just believing what our parents have told us because we don't get a chance to get educated in anything else. Well, here we have a chance. Billy's been, his educational life has been more controlled by higher beings, so he's on a little different path of learning. But Jitsi, his life has gone pretty much the way the rest of us have. Myself, I grew up in a religious family. My mother was a director of an Episcopal church and is very active in it. I have a brother who's a minister and another brother who graduated from Oral Roberts. So there are a few Bibles laying around my house. And myself, well, I was an acolyte and I grew up through the church, and there was a time I probably had the entire communion book memorized. So I have a little background in that myself. Jitsi was probably similar to that and was having a very difficult time now understanding what's going on and that how history could have got changed and altered so much. You can imagine what might happen to someone's mind when suddenly they find out most of the things that they know and they've been told are a little different. They're different and they've been changed on purpose. So that one might irritate you to find out that you've been misled, that things have been misrepresented all of your life and you were educated wrong. Well, they take off for the year 32. They get into Asket's ship. Asket, they're in Jordan now in 1956. The ship just pulls away from Earth, and as Edward described it, they pulled off the planet. You could see the planet very small down below. Asket does something with the instrumentation, and they immediately kind of race right back into the planet and land pretty much in the same place that they were, except it's no longer the year 1956, it's the year 32. Now, I know the calendars are off, and when we talk of the year 32 here, we're talking about the age of Emmanuel, or Jesus Christ. From now on, we're going to call him Emmanuel because that was his real name. In the old language, it was spelled J-M-M-A-N-U-E-L. Not so with an I or an E, but with a J. So we'll refer to him from now on as Emmanuel. Okay? They are now in what we're going to call the year 32, and it's just a few days before the crucifixion. They arrive there, and they get outside of the ship, and the first thing that Edward notices, he's looking around to see how much different everything looked, because they landed right back in the same spot. They're just a couple thousand years earlier. Well, he notices that the vegetation's quite a bit different. Trees are different. Some of the hills, the slopes and angles on them are a little bit different. But for the most part, he's able to recognize the landscape, and he can tell right away that he's at the same spot that they just left. Jitsi right away jumps out of the ship and grabs his pots and pans and his bag and everything with him, and his Bible, because he's having a very difficult time understanding all this. It's quite a shock to your system to be 59 years old and to have all of your well-placed logic suddenly being shattered. Well, Ascot explains that they're going to have to change their clothes because they're going to be here for 4 days, and they're going to do some traveling on foot, and they're going to go to different places, and they're going to mingle among the locals, and it's going to be necessary for them to wear these language translators around their belt. And she has some robes for them, which look like the typical robes of the time. Clothes were quite simple then. People didn't have haircuts too much, and they just, in most cases, just wore some sort of robe. And they had that as well. She had, and it isn't explained why, but she also asked them to take off their earthly clothes and put on the clothes that she brought for them from her planet. And these were silvery kind of looking suits of some sort of soft material. They had to put these on, and then they put the robes over top of that. And Edward was quite concerned. He was almost chuckling. Gee, I hope nobody pulls this robe off of me and sees me glowing like this silver thing here. So it isn't explained why they need to wear that, but it might have something to do as far as protection, but they don't really go into that. They have language translators so they can understand the language of the day, which I believe was Aramaic. That's what I don't know if Aramaic was something they wrote or spoke. I'm not sure about that. So they proceed, and they leave the ship. Ascot explains that they're going to be on the road now for 4 days, and they take off on the road. Well, Jitsi still is mumbling as they go down the road. He's got his Bible with him, and he's getting very nervous because he already knows what's lying ahead. That actually they're going to speak to Emmanuel, that he, after all these years of his life, he never considered the possibility that he might actually come face to face with and actually speak to and talk to Emmanuel. He is so glorified in our time. We've so exaggerated and blown out of proportion who he really was that now we liken him to a god. Some religions like to call him the creator of the universe, the creator of all men, and there's just no limit to some of the exaggerations, when in fact he was a human being like the rest of us. So Jitsi's having a very difficult time, and already the arguments as they go down the road are kind of breaking out, and Edward's trying to calm him down, and so is Ascot. And Jitsi remarks a silly statement like, he can't wait to see this guy Emmanuel. He's going to wring his neck, because he's kind of upset that he's finding out historically that things aren't really the way that we've been told. And Edward is defending Emmanuel and says, well, I don't think that's really quite the right attitude to take here, Jitsi, because it's not his fault. Emmanuel's living in a time when there's also a lot of ignorance, and I believe him to be a very intelligent, worthwhile human being, and probably very loving. And it's not his fault for all the things that have happened down the years and all the exaggerations. So you need to lighten up here a little bit. And Jitsi calms down just a little bit. Well, they wind up right outside of Jerusalem. And Billy says it looks quite a bit different than it did in 1956. There's a wall, he says, around it. He doesn't say if it's all the way around or just part of it. And they're at the Mount of Olives. And off in a distance, he can see some little huts that are called Bethpage. And there's some men walking down their way. And Ascot remarks that, yes, this would surely be Emmanuel and his followers that are coming. And poor Jitsi is just starting to get all heated up again. He's getting very nervous, and all this is entirely too much for him. And he's starting to get very excited. And Edward turns to Ascot, and he says, let me see if I can recognize which person it might be. And Jitchi's jumping in front of them and starting to curse and yell how they can do this to him, and he's so excited. And Edward starts to try to calm him down, says, quit cursing and get a hold of yourself. Try to realize what a great moment this is, that in any minute now you're about to have probably the greatest moment of your life, and look what you're doing to yourself. You know, calm down and relax. But Jitchi can't do it. Asket remarks that, Edward remarks as he looks in the crowd, and he thinks he picks out the one that's probably Emmanuel. He says, that surely must be Emmanuel. And Asket agrees with him, yes, that's him. And Emmanuel pulls away from the crowd of people that he's walking with and motions to him for him to sit down beside the road, which they do, and he starts walking towards the three of them. Well, all this is proving entirely too much for Jitchi, and he's screaming and cursing, and Edward just turns around and pops him right on the nose. Well, it's probably kind of an hysterical sight. Here's this great historic moment. Can you imagine actually being able to go back in time and talk to Emmanuel, and you've got this guy with you? But I can feel sorry for poor Jitchi. It must have been a very difficult thing for him. The outcome of it is nice. Jitchi calms down and apologizes just as Emmanuel walks up and says, be greeted in peace. And he calls Edward by name and acknowledges Asket. And he motions for Jitchi just to go to the side of the road and sit down with his friends and followers there, that they'd be happy to take care of him. And he turns to Edward and says, you hit him very hard. And Edward starts to comment, and he says, that's no reproach at all. He had it coming. I could tell that he was out of control as I was walking towards. And he says, but it's you I wish to speak to. And so they immediately pull over and just sit down the side of the road there. We've got Asket, Edward, and Emmanuel. We're having a little chat. So Edward was curious how he knew his name, and Emmanuel says, well, it's really quite simple. He says, I did not learn this from Asket, and I have not talked to her before. Actually, I have the ability, I guess you would call it a future vision. I have the ability of prophecy. I have the ability to look into the future. And you, Edward, I know much about. Your visitation was expected. And he can tell already that Edward has a lot of knowledge and so forth, and compliments him on his education so far. And Edward says, yeah, well, thank you very much. And they start throwing a few flowers at each other, and there's a few comments there about, how advanced each of them actually are. And Edward comments that Emmanuel is standing before a heavy examination coming up also, and which he is. He's only a couple of days away from what we call the crucifixion. And Emmanuel speaks, yes, life demands very many difficult things. We all have to walk our way, and in honor. And he says to Edward right away, he says, I can already perceive your questions, and I know the things that you want to ask, so it will be not necessary for you to speak them. And since we do not have much time, let me go straight to the answers to your questions that you're thinking. To begin with, the lessons that I speak and so forth are not new. They're not even new to describe my time. These things that I speak of, the laws of creation, the real truths of the universe, have been known to others down through our times. They have been passed on. Here they are only falsified for the scribes themselves. They would wrongly place God above creation and pretend that it is their own God who is the creator of all things. This is simply not true. For myself, I have been educated and know that God being a human being just like all others, but that the great God, is truly a king of wisdom. Creation is not a human form, but a creational spiritual energy which creates all things in the universe, including the different gods. He says it's very difficult to speak the truth here in these times because it's very difficult for people to face the truth. As before me, there's been very little truth spoken on my world. Most people just don't want to hear it. There are so many different viewpoints on this planet right now, it's very difficult for Emmanuel. He says, in the future, the world is heading for very much misery because of all the lies of the scribes, and I'm very well of all of the problems in the next 2,000 years that will be caused by the religions. They will stop at nothing. Murder, deceit, fear, intimidation, whatever they need to do to control the masses of the people. Emmanuel goes on to say, I know the truth, and I'm well aware that the truth brings with it great wisdom and force of spirit. As well, I will be able to fulfill his mission. He says, the truth is far more important than any pain that might be temporarily passing through the body. It's possible to torture someone, even destroy them, but the truth will live on. It is impossible to actually kill the truth. He says, I also know that even though I am a human being, it will be said that I am equal to the creation, that after my time is gone, that those will write about me and make all sorts of claims and exaggerations about me. As a human being, though, I will also suffer the fate of the bodily death, and it says in 83 years in Billy's